And good evening and welcome to RFL. I am Richard French. Well, the U.S. has entered a new phase of the COVID crisis. Not my words, that is according to Dr. Birx this weekend.
We are in a new phase. What we're seeing today is different from March and April. It is extraordinarily widespread. It's into the rural as equal urban areas. And to everybody who lives in a rural area, you are not immune or protected from this virus. And that's why we keep saying no matter where you live in America, you need to wear a mask and socially distance, do the personal hygiene pieces.
I guess it's not all disappearing in April. Well, that's not all the doctor is saying, and not surprisingly, now she apparently in the crosshairs of our president. For that, plus the latest on the vaccine development and the latest in the chapters relating to schools reopening, I want to bring senior political correspondent Andrew Whitman in our conversation.
And the space between the president and Dr. Birx is something different, Rich. We've seen the president at odds with Dr. Fauci, but not Dr. Birx. Again, this is something we really haven't seen until now. The president criticizing Dr. Birx for her warnings that conflict with his. First, more from the doctors. Some Americans, she says, should now consider wearing masks even when they're at home.
If you're in multi-generational households and there's an outbreak in your rural area or in your city, you need to really consider wearing a mask at home, assuming that you're positive if you have individuals in your households with comorbidities.
That conflicts with what the president's been saying, so that prompted this tweet from the president, who saw Dr. Birx's comments as a hit on his virus response and called it pathetic, even as he says Birx was, in his words, too positive, whatever that means. But Birx was not the only White House task force member to tout the benefits of wearing masks this weekend.
Wearing a mask is incredibly important, but we have to have like 85 or 90% of individuals wearing a mask and avoiding crowds. That is essentially gives you the same outcome as a complete shutdown. We've got to have mask wearing. If you have mask wearing, you can reduce the R below 1 just with these simple measures, and we can stamp this outbreak out.
But we already know that wearing a mask has become hotly debated, so as the virus continues to spread, more and more hopes are now resting on the development of a vaccine. But even that vaccine effort is not worry-free. Both Moderna and now Eli Lilly are moving on to late-stage vaccine trials on human subjects. And there's a chance of a vaccine being approved by the end of the year. But new reporting suggests concerns among scientists that political pressures, especially from the White House and especially ahead of the election, may put pressure to approve vaccines on people before they are truly safe and ready. Other reporting focuses on the distribution of a vaccine, noting that the federal government has been so tight-lipped about how it plans to roll out an eventual vaccine that it's making it impossible for states and municipalities to make plans. There are also worries that a vaccine distribution plan might not reach enough people in at-risk groups. That includes minorities and people living in minority neighborhoods. Until there is a vaccine, reopening anything and keeping it open depends on doing the things we've all done to stop the spread, which isn't even happening with people in places that can spend unlimited amounts of money to try and stay virus-free. Take Major League Baseball. They're now dealing with a second-team outbreak. At least 6 members of the St. Louis Cardinals have tested positive. Their outbreak, combined with the one among members of the Miami Marlins, leading to real worries that the baseball season may need to be canceled again, and this time for good. And if COVID can't be controlled in big league baseball, is there any reason to think that schools would be able to keep it out? Especially as we learn more about just how easily kids and the adults who care for them can spread COVID. The largest school system in Georgia, Gwinnett County, just outside Atlanta, 260 school employees positive for the virus, and they were supposed to start remote classes for the new year next week. Sleepaway Camp, also in Georgia, they tested everyone before camp, no positives, but no masks at camp either. Then a camper got sick. Within days, the camp was closed and everyone was sent home. Of the 600 campers and counselors, 3/4 later tested positive. But as we debate school reopening, there is also debate over who should be making the final decisions on schools. On Fridays, leaders in Montgomery County, Maryland, which edges D.C. and is home to some of the most prominent private schools in the nation, said all schools would stay closed through at least October 1st because of the virus. Today, Republican Governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan, who's gotten positive results on the virus, overturned that decision, saying those decisions will now be made by school boards and by private schools themselves. Health officials can now only close schools on a case-by-case individual school basis. Hogan's decision also raised the possibility that public and private schools could make vastly different decisions about reopening, leading to different outcomes for students. Rich?
All right, Andrew, and that's a perfect jumping off point for our next conversation. For more, let's bring in Noelle Ellerson Ng. Noelle, she's the Associate Executive Director for the School Superintendents Association. And Noelle, I can only imagine the kind of conversations, given so many unknowns, superintendents across this country are dealing with. In fact, as we are either at the beginning of school year or getting close to it for so many, how many of them just don't know how many teachers are going to show, how many kids are going to show up to school? How much of this is just being figured out on the fly?
First of all, thanks for the opportunity to be here today. I don't think there's much of this that's being figured out on the fly. The superintendents definitely want to have a plan as much as possible. And I think it's really important to acknowledge the reality that when you have a virus that is still live, a pandemic that is still unfolding, the plan you have laid and airtight this week could be moot next week. And so there's no way a superintendent is going to say that they're able to open the doors and keep schools open for the school year. And there's a lot of change that goes into it. I think the question that you asked is how many superintendents know how many teachers are coming back. There's also the conversation of how many can come back, how many of them are in a physical position where they're not immunocompromised or of an age where they're at higher risk or where they don't have someone that they need to take care of at home. I know superintendents have a pretty good read on what to expect, but until that day comes, until school opens, whether online or in person, there will always be an element of change because we're in a pandemic.
And I mean, we also have played out in Georgia, where between camp and then school, I mean, the numbers and the rate where things can explode, I think some people are finally getting their arms around by just how fast you can have infection spread. But, you know, everybody, I mean, I got 3 kids. I want them all to go to in-school learning. But I'm just doing the practical math in my head, Noelle. One of them has a classmate who turns up positive. That means for days, he or she unknowingly may have been a carrier. So now the whole class has obviously got to shut down. But every day for the last few days, they've been going home. They have siblings. They share the same lunchroom. They same, the same hallways, lockers, etc. How can a school partially shut down? How can you possibly, when you're dealing with kids, have a thing like contact tracing where so many of their lives intersect?
I think this is where the reality of a school district reflecting its community on an average day becomes even more important. The ability of a school district to open and stay open is going to depend upon the ability of the community that it serves to get its spread under control. And we know that children are capable of amazing things. And so, yes, it will be hard for a child to wear a mask. But if you practice at home and they see the adults at home wearing a mask and they see the kids down the street wearing a mask, they can be a little bit more normed to it. And you get into schools and you don't have a stigma around it. And absolutely, does the superintendent want to open their schools like they did last fall? 110%. That's their job. They know how to open schools. What we're all doing and trying to figure out together is how to open schools and keep them open. That's the other thing. Opening them, but then having a significant spread within your district to the level where you need to shut the district down is extremely disruptive. And when you're talking about the trauma impact of surviving a pandemic, and you want to make sure you're minimizing trauma impact on these students. And so schools are thinking through all of that. And some of the scenarios you laid out are things that school districts are clearly anticipating.
But I'm trying to put myself in a superintendent's shoes. Don't you have to shut down the whole school at a certain point if, again, the kid had been walking around unknowingly, to the child's credit, positive? How do you know who has it, who doesn't? How does a teacher know if maybe they came in contact with it or not? I'm just saying there seems to be an inevitability, not because I want there to be, God knows, but I think there would be. And then let's say a school does shut down. How many times do superintendents think they could shut a school down before they just resort to, online learning and not keep trying to do a start and stop, going back and forth?
And that's where we really do look to the clear guidance from the experts on health policy and virus and epidemiologists, looking at, here's the scenario whereby you need to test and trace off a classroom. Here's the scenario where you need to test and trace for an entire school. Here's the scenario where you need to test and trace for the entire district. And then here's the other scenario where you close that school and you close that district. And that's as much on the district as it is really about ensuring that the guidance, information, and resources available from the health policy experts, your state, local, and federal health agencies, your CDC, all the way down to the local level, that information is clear, concise, and trustworthy, hasn't been unnecessarily politicized, and more importantly, that it's actionable.
Okay, I hear you, but we have some states in this country that still don't even mandate masks. So is it possible that state law would trump what a school super would want to do, and you could literally have people walking, onto campus grounds here or in a school without a mask and still be compliant with state law? I'm just trying to figure out the needle these guys have to thread here when you have incoherent federal policy and state by state 50 different sets of rules.
Absolutely. And this is less about what policy is and more about how adults and community members can decide, you know what, for the greater good, this is what I want to work on. I was talking to a reporter earlier today, and I was reminded of the case study that I think everybody gets when you're taking your first class in psychology or child psych. And it's the one where the child is seated down with one marshmallow or one cookie in front of them. It's this concept of delayed gratification. You can have this cookie now, or if you wait for me to come back, you can have 2 cookies or 2 marshmallows. How willing are we to have delayed gratification? So if we're going to identify schools as essential, which we've clearly realized through this pandemic that until the schools reopen, the economy can't reopen. If schools are essential, what are we going to do to protect and prioritize them being open? And if wearing a mask or a piece of fabric over your mouth is what it takes, or limiting your congregation to groups of 10 or less, or not going out to restaurants, or making sure that you're doing grab and go and that you're staying 6 feet apart, you can have all the state policy, all the federal policy, and all the local policy you want in the world in place. It's the willingness of the citizens of the community to buy into this idea that this is a policy that's here for the betterment of me and my community, and I have to do my part. And I know that sounds like a simplified or very naive perspective, but all the best written policy in the world means nothing if people don't do their part to carry that out. So yes, we want schools open, and yes, we want kids to be in schools, and all it takes is one adult to decide that they want to show up on a site one day without a mask and potentially compromise the integrity of the reopening plan. That could happen.
It is amazing what these folks have to deal with, and we obviously wish them the best. Noelle, appreciate you giving us some time today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, everyone, when we come back, when 30 million people out of work, similar numbers have missed housing payments, the COVID economy continues to tank. So, hey, it's the perfect time for the Senate to leave D.C. without a deal on a new COVID relief plan. Did we get any closer to a deal today? We'll have the latest for you next on RFL.